Hello, everybody. How are you? I'm still laughing at the last joke from before we came live. Happy Wednesday. Well, it's hump day today. We got hump day, Tammy.
Woohoo!
How awesome. So, we have a fantastic topic for you today, and I'm going to let the official bio speak for itself, but then I'll tell you why I'm fascinated with this and Tammy at the same time. So, Tammi Moses, who's joining us today, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. She's the founder and the chief encouragement officer of a company called Homes Are for Living, which is also known as the Hoarding Solution. This business is proudly veteran woman owned and operated, and they offer virtual consultations, workshops, and training on the whole issue of hoarding. What's unique about Tammy, what I really like about Tammy, is that she believes in empowering and inspiring others to take their own adversity and use it for the benefit of others. She's also the voice of adult kids of parents that hoard, and she's the voice and advocate for youth living in the hoard. You can connect with Tammy in various ways, and I'll let you know how to do that as we go throughout. So, Tammy, we've been talking even before we went live here about, hoarding is a thing, and a lot of people are surrounded with it, including adults who are dealing with parents and youth who are living in the situation. So, how did you come across this issue, and what has put your passion to work here? How did this come to be? I'm so glad somebody's working on this issue.
Well, hi, Pam. Thanks so much for having me here today. I'm excited to talk about this issue. And honestly, I'm not sure it's something I ever thought I would talk about publicly. I grew up in the 80s. There was like this shame element around, the house is messy. Why don't you clean it up type of thing. And I honestly joined the military to get away from all that stigma. Like, I wanted to have my own life without having that umbrella over my head, if you will. And
so were your parents essentially hoarders then?
Well, I don't believe it started that way, but it became a hoarding issue, a excessive clutter issue. There was a lot of emotional dynamics going on that you couldn't really move things around without some sort of distress or drama. And so it became one of those things where you were kind of living in it, but you couldn't really do anything about it, basically.
Got it.
And I don't think I realized like how significant the issue was until honestly after I kind of moved out on my own. And then in my earlier 20s, I would come home and I'd be like, well, this hasn't gotten any better.
Okay. Gotcha.
And the hard part for me, and it's come up in some of the other groups and things I'm in, is I had a younger brother in a wheelchair, and I felt really guilty about leaving him behind when I moved out. But I also felt like I couldn't save anybody but myself. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of is what drove me to get away. But I went in the military. I had a marriage that I ultimately ended, thankfully. I moved through some different phases in life before I came to realize that like hoarding is a thing. And I had experience surviving it. And there were things that I did that I didn't even realize that helped me manage that and helped me navigate it. And so it kind of became a mission to talk about housing issues, to talk about homelessness, which is an issue for many countries and cities and states. And I started to find that sometimes people are evicted because of hoarding issues. Sometimes you can't rent, or you get booted, so I started to see that even though my main focus was initially around housing issues, I started to see how hoarding fell into that category. And early on, I had a business mentor say, well, what else do you know about? And I mentioned hoarding briefly, and they're like, well, there's like shows. I'm like, yeah, I know. I can't watch them. I can smell it. And so it kind of became, well, you know too much to be quiet. And why don't you take this and turn it into something that is useful for other people to understand the issues? And So that's kind of how it started, was kind of a little nudge and a little this, and it,
Yeah, that's
and
the way, isn't it?
exactly. And
And then
it's
you can't
just
stop it.
right. And then the momentum started to grow, and I did do on-site work for about 3 years, helping people sort their things and go through stuff. And honestly, they want to tell their story. They want to be heard. And the other underlying thing that I have found is that so much trauma exists for people, and the hoarding is more of a response mechanism to the trauma than it is about the stuff. The stuff is like a symptom of so many of the underlying things that are going on.
Huh.
And so there's a mindset sometimes that you go in and say, okay, we're going to do a forced clean out, which sometimes that's necessary if you're dealing with rodents or fall issue. Like, there is reasons why that is necessary, but it's not necessarily recommended, because that person isn't having a chance to sort their stuff. They aren't having a chance to deal with the trauma issues that are causing them to hoard in the first place. So there's a real need to come at people like they're people, and not like there's like trigger things that you probably don't want to say if you're trying to actually be helpful.
Got it. And you know what those are? Well, a couple things come out of this is that, the special sauce in what you do is dealing with the issues behind hoarding as opposed to hoarding itself. Like so many of the things that can go wrong or south in our life, like you're saying, it's basically a symptom. But you also said something that hadn't occurred to me before. There's something known as surviving a hoarding household when you're not a hoarder, like what you did. So there's a whole second set of people out there you're working with who aren't necessarily hoarders themselves, but not only are they potentially dealing with the trauma of having lived in a household with hoarders and all the underlying stuff that goes with that, but now they might, in there as they get older, have to deal with older parents who now need them to take care of this situation. So, like, who's your client? You know what I mean? It's like there's so many in that stream. There's the survivor, there's the person who's got to do the cleaning, and then there's the actual hoarder, right?
You've got a number of people that are impacted by these situations. And the way I kind of look at it is, you have the person that hoards kind of in the middle, right? And then you have all these spokes coming off of, you might have a landlord, you might have a property manager, you've got the adult kid, you might have minors, you sometimes will have youth living in that situation. Firefighters might be involved. You might have adult protective or child protective. Sometimes the court gets involved. So you end up having a lot of other people that are surrounding this situation. And I find that we have a hard time figuring out how to navigate it so that we can help that person the best way, that we can be win-win as much as possible in those situations. And a lot of people talk to me because they don't know what to do with their parent. Other times it's people that are like, a landlord is purchasing a property and they're like, I have to deal with these 3 tenants that have a hoarding issue. What do I do? And so we can have a conversation about, hey, if you go in there, talk to Mrs. Smith and ask her how she's doing today. If she talks about her cat, find out the cat's name. Like, have a conversation before you dive into the fact that you can't see the shower because it's full of newspapers, or you can't navigate the kitchen because there's stuff all over the floor. Like, obviously, clearly, you're walking in there and seeing that. But the way you react and what you say is going to set the tone for every other interaction you have. And if that person doesn't trust you, or that person thinks you're there to judge them, then you're not going to get very far. And so even things like wear a scarf and put a little essential oil on it, be prepared to not sit down if you're going into that. But sometimes you'll walk in and you'll not realize what you're walking into. And so,
or all the things to be sensitive to. And what I'm hearing is the stuff is really the least of the problems. It is the problem. It is the thing that draws all the attention from all these spokes, but it's not the problem that needs to be solved, is
It's
what I'm
it's
hearing.
it's kind of like that's the overriding issue, and the stuff is usually the stuff or the smell is
Yeah,
usually what is drawing that attention in.
got it.
And if you like, I personally have a hard time watching some of the shows that exist, but over the last weekend I made myself watch one.
Huh? How'd it go?
And so it was kind of tough. I had to take a break and come back. But what I noticed a lot of the times is if you respond to that person like a person, you're going to get more traction in general. But
Got
if
it.
you come in as I'm the professional and I'm here to make you change what you're doing, you aren't going to be as successful. And so I think that's part of why it's difficult, because you might have a one size fits all, checklist or things like that, which is essential to actually staying on track. But you also have to figure out what is that human element in that person? How can you connect with them? How can you help them understand that you care, that you're not there to be
Judge.
difficult or be a challenge or make their lives hard? But a lot of times people that hoard don't think they have a problem.
Got it.
They can't see the issue, and so they don't understand why anybody would want to help, because why? I don't have a problem.
Yeah.
And
And
so
everybody coming in can't understand how they don't see the problem, I'm
right,
guessing.
exactly.
You get frustrated by that, which exacerbates things. So to me, I think of these TV shows, or I think of hoarding, and somebody's doing this, you would need to physically be there to work with them. But what has COVID done to your ability to work with people, and how's that playing out? Are you finding that you're taking more of a focus on the emotions of it, or like how is that working?
So it definitely impacted the fact that I was not doing on-site work anymore.
Yeah.
And there's a part of me that is okay with that, though, because it can be very physically demanding and challenging. And if you're a business, if you're an organizer or a real estate agent, or if you are a plumber or an electrician, or somehow you're coming in contact with this, you need help. Like, you shouldn't try to do it all by yourself.
Got it.
And so that's on a business side, it's helpful to have a team, or at least someone else that can help you navigate this. But on the other side of that, if you're a person that has a hoarding or a clutter issue and you're ready to deal with it, we can totally have a conversation and say, tell me what your end result is that you're looking for, and we'll make a plan that you can plop on your fridge and you can check it off as you go. Or we can have a weekly call if that's what you need to be accountable to keep getting things done. The other side is, of course, an adult kid, or maybe a loved one that's trying to help someone that has a hoarding issue, and you're trying to navigate it. You live on the East Coast, they're on the West Coast. How in the world are you going to do that? So we can kind of say, okay, where's your loved one at? What's the end result? How quickly do we need to move this? Are we trying to do assisted living? Are you just downsizing? A lot of people want to age in place, and I totally can appreciate that. But if you have rodents crawling through your kitchen, if you can't cook on your stove, if a caregiver cannot come in and vacuum your floor, like, how do you propose to continue living that way if we don't address it? And then you can't always tell what repairs need to be made and things like that until you have removed some of the clutter and you can see the floor or the wall or the closet. So there's all these things that come up that are expensive, heartbreaking, and frustrating. And so, and who do you talk to? You can't really go out and say, hey, by the way, my dad's got this issue, and people look at you like, well, why aren't you fixing it? Well, he won't let me.
Yeah.
And
what?
so,
Yeah.
exactly.
And it's interesting. It falls in this bucket of all the things that now some of us who are older are dealing with senior parents. And that just adds yet another layer to the complexity of, living in place, moving to assisted living, whatever the right choice is for that person. And, I remember that there can be a very firm and stubborn piece of this conversation that's impossible to overcome. And I wasn't even dealing with hoarding. And so, to me, a lot of what you mentioned to me, that it's important for the adult who's now resolving the issue for the parent. Like, you take care of them as well, it sounds like.
Yes, and that focus on, I mean, there's that societal expectation that we'll help our parents as they age, and that we'll step in and kind of become their aide or guardian or caregiver. And that's already difficult to do if you're raising your own family, or if you're, that's already a challenge. And then you throw some hoarding in there, or some excessive clutter, and that kind of stubbornness piece. Now you've got this whole situation going on that's not easily resolved. And a lot of times it's that outside pressure or crisis that drives change, versus, hey, I noticed this is a problem, Mom. And, I know you don't want to talk about it, but I'm concerned about the fall risks. After surgery, you're not going to be able to go back to this place. You're going to have to go to a rehab facility for 2 weeks or whatever. Like, there's all these things that start to come up in the middle of a crisis. And my thing is, if you see an issue, say something early on, but find a way to be kind, find a way to be human, if possible. And the other part about hoarding is that sometimes there's underlying mental health issues that aren't addressed. Frequently, like anxiety, depression. And so if you aren't aware that that is something else you're dealing with, your attempts to intervene might be met with a lot of anger. And
even if you are aware of it, but aren't trained as a psychiatrist to deal with it, or psychologist to deal with it, I would imagine that's.
And let's face it, most of us aren't trained in some kind of mental health intervention strategy that's going to be effective. And that's, for me, the faulty thinking in society is, oh, well, you're the kid, you can fix it. Well, let's have a conversation about
not always.
And sometimes you aren't the best person because you're emotionally invested or overwrought, or maybe you don't, maybe you've been estranged from your parents for whatever reason.
Maybe it's your parent, and you just inherently don't say no to your parent.
Right.
It might, even as old as we get, when the mom raises the eyebrow, it's still, oops, okay, I didn't mean that. I remember that with my mom, and as sick as she got and as weak as she got, she could still make that eyebrow go up, and I'd be like, okay, I'm stepping back. I'll step off it right now. And those are our parents. It's very hard to, number one, realize that you are the logical thinking, probably know the best for them, for a parent, because it's supposed to be the other way around. I don't care how old you are. That's still weird. And then, the natural reaction to do what you're told by a parent. I'm sure that gets in the way too.
Well, and I mean, I consciously made a choice dealing with my own parents that I could either have a relationship or I could focus on the stuff. And I made a decision to really try to focus on the relationship for a period of time and kind of just let them live their own life until it came to a point where I needed to do something. But even in the do something phase, there's an expectation that if you call certain entities that they'll just intervene and fix it. And that's not true, because we're autonomous. We're allowed to live how we want, essentially. And until you fall, or until there's an ambulance, or there's a fire, or some disaster, a lot of times we just let people live how they want to live. And that, I totally understand that. Like, I don't want someone marching into my house and telling me what to do. Yet we do that to people where we can't compute what we're seeing. So it's really difficult sometimes to navigate this, and there are not a lot of resources.
That's why I love what you do, because I know there are people dealing with this, and it's to have a place just to go to have the conversation is incredible. Like you said, you don't have anybody to talk to. And I think that would be really, really neat. We had friends that one set of friends that I'm pretty sure the wife was a hoarder, but I couldn't call it that. And that's why I had a question for you. What is the difference between excessive stuff and hoarding?
So basically, within hoarding, if you have a hard time discarding items, that is one sign of hoarding. And it's not necessarily that you want to keep the stuff, it's more that you're afraid of making the wrong decision. So you make no decision and just keep everything, which is still a decision. But like some people will have collections of things and some people will have just this hoard of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest difference I see is if you have a collection, it's usually maintained, taken care of, it's on a shelf, it's something you would show off if someone came over, versus hoarding where you might have a lot of stuff, it's not organized, your space is filled up, you can't navigate it.
Got it.
Like your shower is now your closet, you've got it stacked with newspapers, your stove might be covered with things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, but also you could also have spaces that are very clear and usable, but you might have it in the living room stacked with boxes. So it isn't always squalor, it isn't always gross, but it still can be excessive stuff, or people will buy stuff online and have it sent to them.
And that's like on a spectrum of hoarding then.
Yes.
Because it's interesting. I tell a little story about my grandparents. So when they grew up during the Depression. Well, they didn't grow up during the Depression. They were parents during the Depression. And at one point they had to send one of their kids to live with some cousins because they couldn't afford to put food on the table. And that certainly stuck with my dad as he grew up. He was the kid that got moved out. And his thing was, I'm never going to borrow money for anything because I will always have the cash to support my family. So that's how he was affected. But they were affected in that they kept everything but for a reason. Like they kept butter wrappers because you could put a butter wrapper in boiling water and still get enough butter off to, work on your pasta or whatever it might be. They kept newspapers, they kept magazines, but it was really neatly done. Like in the basement, everything was beautifully put away and stacked, but they could have lived on purpose, a year on what was in their basement. And I'm curious if that's hoarding or if that's like just planning, you know what I mean? Because it was neat. It didn't consume their home.
It sounds like kind of a combination, but like you're saying, it didn't overtake their space. It didn't impair their living, basically. Right. And there is something, that frugal mindset. Like, honestly, it never occurred to me to put a butter wrapper in water, but I totally get that because you dump a little in when you make pasta. So I think that some of that mindset of lack and fear of not having enough is what drives that.
Yeah.
But I also understand that, you survive something that makes you want to be prepared. It makes you not want to suffer. And I just think that in some ways, I think we have to normalize clutter a little bit. We have to normalize the fact that most of us have a junk drawer or a room.
Right.
Or stuff like we live, right? And so I think it's okay for us to have things. I don't believe that you need to only have one fork and one spoon and one mug. Like I think it's okay to have your set and not. And something else that comes up a lot is like we save our good dishes for some kind of occasion all the time.
I'm laughing because I have our good dishes in a cabinet. It's like our china from Deb's grandmother, and we never pull it out.
And I have stuff that I was like, do I keep the Christmas stuff? Because I don't use it's got the gold on it, and I don't put it in the dishwasher and all that. But yet my grandma gave it to me, and it wasn't like a generational hand down. It was more like, hey, I want you to have these Christmas dishes. And
got it.
But I'm like, so do I not use them or do I use them? So I really started to. And I have some cut glasses I've had for years, right? And then I thought, I'm gonna get rid of this stuff. I was like, no, I'm not. I'm gonna use this sucker. And if I happen to break it between now and whenever, okay.
So be it. It's like there's an overkill. There's an overkill. Yeah, and I think that is totally, totally true. And yet, actual hoarding. When I hear hoarding, I think of what you described as somebody living in their own place in squalor or unhealthy or dangerous for fire or for falls or for whatever it might be. And one of the things, I have a question with, because I'm sure I'm, not the only one who's like I said, we had some friends a while ago that I thought may be running into the situation, but certainly a lot of us of this age and even a little younger are dealing with parents around here now. What is something we can do? Number one, I want to know how people can reach out to you if they have questions, but what are things we can do now if we have a situation where a parent is a hoarder? What's something we can do before they fall or before the fire or before, the health department comes in?
I think one of the challenges is, well, I'll come at it two ways. One is reestablishing a relationship if you have not had one for a period of time for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, an easy way to do that is a phone call, an email. Maybe you take that. I've had some very long conversations. Maybe you take that hour and you listen to whatever it is going on with them and just try to reestablish that connection.
I love
if
it.
You are already connected and you see them, like say you talk to them but haven't been to their home in a while, and you go there and you see, holy cow, mom or dad is living with this, and start with safety. They aren't generally still going to necessarily want to hear what you say, but start with, I'm concerned about the fact that you can't get from your recliner to the bathroom without knocking something over. And then that is a trip hazard. And don't demonize the person for having an issue, because sometimes, and I've seen this with my own clients, a long-term health issue is what caused that house to fall into that situation. And it's not that they don't care or wouldn't like to do it. They can't physically manage it. And so I have found success in coming in as a kind of a friendly coaching situation, hear what they're saying, and then ask, can I move this for you?
Mm-hmm.
Could we sort this closet? And come at it from a more human perspective instead of, oh, I'm going to come in here and throw everything away. You've just immediately shut off communication.
Is that why those shows are so hard to watch? Because that's pretty much what they do. I haven't watched one in ages, but
there is kind of this attitude of, this is how we're going to do it today. And you need someone to take the lead that way. That is true. But you can also come alongside the person and be like, look, this is why we're trying to do this. I understand that you have 100 purses, which I have experienced that. Could we talk about why you have so many? And then as they talk about it, we downsize to like 50. And that might not sound like progress, but that's
progress.
That is progress.
Yeah.
And then they're able to release it. So I think you have to really key into the human element and what is going on. Mm-hmm. And if that person has animals of any kind, even if it's not excessive, that animal is like their companion, their friend, their buddy. And I think you have to be mindful of how you talk about the animal or animals.
No matter what. Yeah.
No matter what. And I think there's a lack of respect sometimes when we're dealing with this, because we know what needs to happen. Like you can walk in and clearly say, okay, if I was in charge right this second, this is what I would do. Mm-hmm. And you can keep that in mind, but you kind of have to back it down to what can this person handle right now? And you may not have to clear the whole space. Maybe you just need to get it safe. Maybe you need a 36-inch path so a gurney could get in. Maybe they just need the fridge repair person to be able to get to the kitchen. Like maybe you need to break it down and not say, today we're clearing a 2,500 foot square house, mom, that you've lived in for 30 years. Like,
I love this. This actually rings true as entrepreneurs where we are really strong in our specialty. We would never do that with a client, right? We'd never talk to a prospective client or a client and say, well, here's the mess you're in. And yep, I can see the clear view to the end. You have no idea what I'm talking about, but you don't need to. Don't worry about it. I'm going to plow through everything you've created in your life here with this business and straighten it out for you. Now, if I said that to any client ever, that would be it forever. And same with any of us, I think, who are entrepreneurs. And it's just interesting. The way you described that made me really connect it. We'd never treat a client that way. And what we're talking about now is our parents or a friend or somebody who needs kind of help. And the other thing that really jumped out at me is, like any other similar situation where the symptoms are so strong, we're dealing with an underlying illness or trauma in
Yes.
almost every case.
And I think as human beings, we have to recognize that. And in business, one of the things that, like, people talk about business to business, and honestly, you're dealing people to people. Even if you are dealing with a business, it's that human connection that makes the difference. It's that customer service. It's that follow up, which I know I'm not always even that great at it because we get buried with stuff. And it's just, but finding that way to make that human connection, I think, is what people buy you. And then they're like, oh, I want to figure out how to work with you. And I've had that experience where I'm not really sure what to do, but can we have a call? And so it kind of evolves, you know?
Yep. I'm with you completely. That makes total sense. And it was a light bulb moment for me on this whole thing, because, my instinct is to go, oh my God, this is a mess. Let's just clean it up. And that's not how I'd ever do anything with anybody. So, and I wouldn't want anybody like who saw, for example, my marketing stuff to come in and go, oh my God, that's a mess. Although maybe that would be the best thing. But, when something's got those emotional connections too, it can get a little crazy.
And definitely that emotional aspect is what we have to key into, I think, if we want to successfully navigate most situations. And I've had experiences where I just walked in and be like, all right, we're going to have a conversation. And I in my head, I kind of knew where it needed to go, but then I just kind of released it and said, okay, let's see where this conversation goes. And a lot of times people haven't let anyone else in for a very long time. And I mean, the fact that I'm showing the room I work out of on a camera, like, that never would have crossed my mind. Like, you keep it hidden, and like you don't let people in. And then I think about, like, even now, people on Zoom calls, like, do you ever wonder why someone's not on camera? Like, in a big group, like, sometimes I'm not, because I'm not presentable or I'm not feeling it. But other times, like, you might be a kid in this situation, and now you don't really want your teacher to see the living room where you're sitting.
Yeah, wow. Yep. And that's why I love the fact that you're working with youth on this as well, because like I said, there's a whole secondary set of traumas going on here for kids who live in these situations. So I know we've had a lot of people actively listening here and are going to be interested in knowing more. Where's the best place to find you, Tammi? And I know if you're walking on the replay, guys, or live, if you've got questions related to this at all, if you're comfortable enough, you can drop them right in the comments, or feel free to DM Tammi. If you're in my group, Tammy's in the group, you can DM her. But scrolling across the bottom here is her website, which is one of the best places to get in touch with her. But is there any other kind of words of wisdom you want to drop just before we go? This is so valuable. I can't thank you enough for having this really honest, transparent conversation here with us.
Well, thank you for having me. And like you mentioned, the website, thehoardingsolution.com, is where you can find my blog. You can schedule a consultation. I also have a podcast called The Hoarding Solution, and that is magically now on my website. I learned this morning. But also I have a couple hashtags that I use. One is AKOPTH and the other is YLITH, and it's adult kids of parents that hoard and youth living in the hoard. And if you're not necessarily looking to talk to me directly immediately, there's also Children of Hoarders Inc., which is a very valuable, and there's something for minors called My COHP, which is minor youth and children of hoarding parents. And sometimes you can't talk about it with other people. So those resources are out there, or if you need them or want more, I can always send links and things like that, because sometimes you don't want to talk to anyone yet, but you'd love to read or research it or find out.
You want to poke around and find out that, especially if you're the hoarder and you're starting to recognize that you want things to be different, that may be the kind of thing where I'm not ready to talk to you yet, but I want to poke around and see what's available. That's amazing.
And there are other entities, NAPO, which is organizers. Like, you can look for organizers. I think it's napo.org or net. And you want to question folks if you're trying to figure out if they're the right fit for what your situation. because some people don't want to dive into these issues, and I understand that.
Yeah.
I also have a group, the Hoarding Solution group, where it's slowly growing, but it's about talking about this more transparently and having conversations that are just
Is that a
changing how we deal
Facebook
with
group,
it.
Tammy?
Yeah,
Or
it is.
oh, what's the name of that Facebook group?
It's probably at the Hoarding Solution, but the Hoarding Solution group is what I have, and I can also post a link in your
That
group
would be
later
great. Go ahead and post that in the
in a
in
comment.
on my site, because, or in the comments, because that may be something that folks might want to start looking into and have a conversation, and know there are other people out there dealing with it as well.
And there's people that want to figure out a better way to deal with this and start dealing with it earlier, which is really what needs to happen.
Mhm.
And I'm digging more and more into trying to figure out why we aren't dealing with it sooner. And so
Mhm. Cool.
there's a real, and there are people that are like, I'm hosting a monthly roundtable where it's just, hey, if you're dealing with this, come and join us.
Great.
And because that's where the conversations are happening about how can we do this better and different.
Well, I'll
And
tell you what, if you're having one of those and you ever feel like posting about it in our group, please do that. The whole
thank you.
point of the group is to let us all know the kind of resources that are out there for each other. And what you're doing is really a blessing. And I'm just grateful you chose to join us inside the Profit Concierge. We're here to support you as well. So know that if there's anything we can do to support you, the plethora of talents in this group is amazing. So thanks so much for taking the time out today. It really, this has been a really enlightening conversation.
Thank you so much, Pam. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to support folks however I can.
Awesome. Everybody have a good rest of Wednesday, and we will see you again tomorrow on Snack and Learn. And I know with me, you're also grateful for Tammy joining us. So thanks, and have a great afternoon.